What's happening, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Austin, and welcome to this week's Roundup. And joining me, as always, Mr. Tom Anderson. Tom, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Austin. Good to see you.
Good to be seen. Good to see you too, man. So you were away last week on a like a little family vacation, right?
Yep. Yeah, I was out for a bit. So yeah, it's good to be back in the saddle, though.
Yeah, good to have you back. Good to have you back. So, all right, well, what's been going on behind the scenes at DevvE? Where do we want to go today? What's on the chopping block?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things I thought would be good to hit today. One is a little bit of an update on the public shard. And then the second is I thought it would be good to delve into our bailment solution a little bit. We've done deeper dives in the past into the fraud, theft, loss protections, things like that. But the bailment, I've seen comments online on Telegram where I think some people don't fully kind of understand what it is. It's an important part of what we're doing. So I thought a little bit of a deeper dive there would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So where would you like to start? You want to start on the public shard stuff?
Yeah. So not a huge update, but it's coming along well is the main thing. So Bill Anderson on our team is driving the public shard, and he's going through and getting it in. We're re-architecting kind of the DevOps side of things. So kind of just the management and setup of the servers, on the back end, and getting it set up more where it's easier to have other companies onboarding and running things. One of the things that while I was out, you get a little bit of extra, thinking time. And sometimes it's good to get away from the hustle and bustle of kind of the everyday stuff and be able to think about things a little bit more deeply. And one of the things that I did spend some cycles on is just thinking about how we can integrate DevvE more into the public shard. I think there's going to be projects that they're going to want to spin up their own shard, but I also think there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to want to just use like a shard. It doesn't have to be theirs. And if we integrate, DevvE payments tied directly into the API calls, I think it'll allow for a more robust way of kind of growing things. So I've been thinking a little bit more about that, how we're going to implement it, where and when it applies. And then, got back, touched base with Bill this morning, and he's been making good progress. We're very close to being able to have the new shard up and running. And from there, we just got to decide on, when we want to actually put things out. But on the technical side, everything's coming together, to get it out. And this, the public shard is one of the most important things I think we're working on right now. I think it'll drive awareness, lots of other projects, lots of other utility, so seeing that coming together is exciting.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that we're so close on seeing something come to fruition there. So,
yep.
To kick us over to bailment, because this is such a huge topic, and I'll be honest with you, it's not a term I ever really heard used prior to it being used, by you here at DevvE. So, for folks that is a new term for them, what is a bailment partner exactly?
Yeah. So when I refer to bailment, it's what people in the crypto space usually just refer to as custody, but I like to refer to it as bailment rather than custody, because bailment implies ownership in a different way than custody does. And in particular, this is the reason I want to talk about it. It implies some of the benefits that we have over other projects in terms of security and risk, on your assets. And so, one way to think about the bailment process is through an analogy, right? And so when you go and you are checking in at a hotel, you hand your keys to the doorman or whatever right at the front of the hotel, and then they give you a ticket, and then you have that ticket, and so the ticket kind of represents the use of the car. And then you stay there. A few days later, you give the ticket back and you get the car back. So the ticket is kind of the representation. And so before crypto existed, bailment was a legal term, and it was used for situations like that, where you have a representation of ownership, of an asset. And so the reason that I like to separate it from just custody is, again, kind of the implications around edge cases where things go wrong. So one of the big problems and the big challenges, and again, all of us that have been in the crypto space for years, we all know that, like, you're always at risk of having your account hacked and someone figures out how to steal your private key, or you hit a fake website that looks real and then they drain all your assets, so there's all the kind of risks there. But one of the big risks is, you give somebody your assets and then they, kind of inappropriately manage it, right? So the big famous one is FTX, right? So everybody put their assets into FTX's care. They were holding on to the assets, and then they illegally took people's deposits and invested them, into their sister company, the Alameda Research, right? And then there's others that, that if you just Google, you can search that there's dozens of situations where an exchange or some other platform went out of business, they go into bankruptcy. And then what happens, same as FTX, but there's a lot of them, where then they go into this bankruptcy process and your assets are held up. And so in FTX's case, it was a couple years later. People got, some money back, but they lost all the upside during that time frame, so it was really kind of a negative situation. And so in general, when you in the crypto space, you put your assets into somebody else's hands, there's a big risk there. Another one more recently was the Bybit hack, and so Bybit lost enough money that it almost put them out of business. And there were even some other exchanges that didn't want another FTX event happening and drag the whole ecosystem down. So some of the other exchanges chipped in and helped, Bybit out. I'm sure they had arrangements and, Bybit's, needing to figure out how to pay them back and everything. But if that $1.5 billion Ethereum theft had been enough that it put them out of business, and it was right at the cusp, it easily could have, then Bybit would have, gone into bankruptcy. And then what would happen is you spend, again, years with your assets kind of, being held there. You can't get access to them. Courts are figuring it out. Courts are figuring out priority. Maybe there's people that signed agreements with Bybit where they have priority over the assets, and then they get paid out first because that's kind of the legal system, right? So whatever the specifics are, you go into this legal process, and it just takes a long time, and your assets are held up that whole time. And, sometimes you get back 10%, sometimes you get back 80%, right? It's usually not 100%. So you have that long time delay, and you have the risk of what you get back. And so, and it also kind of goes against the core philosophy of crypto, not your keys, not your assets, right? And so one of the important things that we've designed, and I would call it, one of our big 5 or 6 things, is in terms of protection and security. And there's a couple others like contingent transaction sets and mathematically instantaneous settlement. Those are important inventions too. But in terms of security and safety, there's kind of 5 or 6 things. So one's our fraud protections, our theft protections, our private key loss protections. We've described those. Privacy is another one. So bailment is one of those big concepts that we've designed in that really protects people. And in those examples that I just gave, where you give your assets to somebody, and that's how all centralized exchanges are, right? If something happens, they go into bankruptcy, then you have that long delay. Well, we wanted to design something where you don't have that risk. And a big part of why we designed it in this way is a lot of what we're trying to do is work with TradFi companies. And TradFi companies don't want to trust small companies. They don't even want to trust even the biggest of the crypto companies are, a lot of those are small companies, from their point of view. They're not the same as, a JP Morgan Chase, right? That has such deep pockets and such trusted status that, that doing a deal and sign a contract with them, you're going to be safe. In the crypto space, you don't have that level of security and safety, right? And so the way we designed our bailment approach was to address those issues, make it where if there's a problem that you don't have this years of bankruptcy, and largely towards customers we're targeting, which are TradFi companies. So with all of that said, then what did we do different? So one of the things that's neat about our overall approach is we have what we call verification nodes. And so other companies can maintain an entire copy of the blockchain. And as each block hits the blockchain, we can distribute it out to any verification nodes so that those entities maintain their copy. And once they get added, we can't change them, right? And so it's one of the most important things in blockchain in general. So in Bitcoin's case, you have validators that are maintaining the blockchain, and they use proof of work, and it's a contest to see who gets to add the next block, and there's a reward with the next block, right? But the result of that is you have many copies of the blockchain, and that's what makes it immutable, right? So it's mathematically immutable block to block, but the entirety of the chain is immutable because it's held in so many places. But you don't have to have the entities controlling the actual consensus mechanism to have that advantage. So that's what our verification nodes do. They let many different entities keep a copy of the blockchain. Then in the blockchain, block by block is immutable mathematically because each block takes, a snapshot, so to speak, of the block before it. But then you have the entirety of the blockchain held by different entities. And even if you have two, right, it's immutable, right? And so with our verification nodes, you could have as many as we want. And so what we do in our bailment process then, where we use that approach, the verification nodes, is a bailment partner maintains a verification node, keeps an entire copy of the blockchain, and then when you have a wrapped token, like wrapped Bitcoin, for example, they hold the Bitcoin. Then you have a representation of that Bitcoin on the blockchain that they keep an entire copy of that blockchain, maintaining the records of the ownership. And then and what we do then is set it up where with the bailment partner, they contractually agree with us that if the platform itself goes out of business, then they have that full copy of the assets that are underlying the wrapped tokens and they can return them to people. So if we go out of business, if we go into bankruptcy, then instead of all the users that were trusting the platform, instead of them having risk of that 2-year delay and you get a percentage of it, all that risk is gone because the bailment partner has an entire copy and the legal obligation to return the assets if the platform goes out of business. And so if the platform goes out of business, unlike FTX, you can go and get your assets right away. And so then there's the question, well, what about, the platform itself, the actual, I'll say custody partner. So our platform has a bailment solution where you have a representation of assets and your assets. You still need the actual custody. Again, that's part of where I separate those terms. So you need an entity that's actually holding on to the Bitcoin. And the way we manage that is the entities that we're working with have insurance. And so if an entity like that has insurance, and the insurance won't cover if, the other things we protect, like the private key loss and the theft protection and stuff like that. But the insurance will cover the custody partners, control of the assets. So if their system gets hacked, then insurance will cover it, right? And so if you have Lloyd's of London, for example, a big insurance company or something else like that really is fully trusted, managing that the custody itself is assured, and then you have our bailment solution assuring that if the platform goes under, you can go to that system, and then you have the fraud protections and loss protections, on your control of it. You've covered the whole gambit of everything, right? And all of those are risks that everybody lives with. And all of those are risks that have bitten a lot of people. A lot of people lost money in FTX and other bankruptcies. A lot of people have lost money when a custody partner acted inappropriately. A lot of people have lost money when they lost their private keys. A lot of people have lost money when somebody hacked their system and got a control of their private key or tricked them into using their private key in a way that was deceitful, right? So with our system, we protect each of those pieces along the way, and you just set everything up that's, you have those protections in place. And so overall, that's why I wanted to describe the bailment solution, because we've described other, attack vectors, you might think of it, along the way. But this is one of the most important ones, the protection of the platform itself. So that's kind of a summary.
I have questions. I have questions, Tom. We're gonna get into them here. Okay, cool. So the first question that I have for you is, on most of your decentralized or self-custodied or let's say trusted exchanges out there, if you wanted to enter a network, you'd go through a simple mint burn, generally a bridge, right? Which you send it into the bridge contract. The bridge contract sends a message to the alternate network, and it prints you out your IOU. It's essentially the same system, but without a human in the middle. And so are the bailment partners going to be working in lieu of a traditional bridge? Or is it the sort of thing where you say, I want to deposit in the exchange and you're going to send your Bitcoin, and that's going to be the address of the bailment partner who will then issue you, your wrapped Bitcoin or something of that nature?
Yeah. So one of the biggest attack vectors across the entire crypto industry is bridges, right? That's people have lost a lot of money through bridges, and there's lots of bugs and hacks and problems there. So this is an alternative to that, right? So if you want to, put your Bitcoin onto, and you always have this problem when you have wrapped tokens, right? There's a lot of wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum. And so somebody has that Bitcoin, right? And so, and then there isn't a smart contract system on Bitcoin. So you're trusting someone. That's one thing I think people don't totally fully acknowledge and understand is, like you're using wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum. Oh, it's Ethereum, it's decentralized. I have the keys, but there's still somebody that you're trusting. You maybe not even realize it, but there's somebody that owns the Bitcoin. So what you were just asking is on a platform that actually has smart contracts, which is not Bitcoin. But if you have a platform that actually has smart contracts, you can implement the ownership through those smart contracts. And so, smart contracts just aren't trustworthy. I mean, that's been kind of universally historically shown that again, it's one of the biggest attack vectors. So if you, in our case, put your money into a system that again has insurance on it, it's to me just so much more trustworthy. I would rather trust Lloyd's of London than the security of a smart contract by far. That's like for my own personal assets, that's just a better solution. And then again, especially when you're talking about TradFi institutions. I've had TradFi institutions that have literally said to me, we can't use these platforms because they're built on smart contracts and smart contracts are too risky. We cannot maintain our fiduciary responsibilities and use smart contracts, right? And then the other thing is smart contracts a lot of times have tax consequences that you don't want as well. So this is an alternative to that that's more feasible and palatable for TradFi institutions. But I think it's better for individuals too, right? Because again, then you're ultimately trusting on a wrapped token, a system that has insurance on it. And so yeah, I think it's a better approach overall.
Well, and to that point, there are some bridges that have been, very hard and very successful over the years. But I'll tell you, when I used to work with the guys over at Phantom, we had a bridge that was called AnySwap, and it worked great for years. The contract was fine. But here's what people didn't realize was that a single EOA, which is an externally owned address, held the private key to all of the escrow contracts on the various networks. And he happened to be a Chinese national. Chinese government came in and yoked this guy up one day, started siphoning tens of millions of dollars, and they just disappeared. And every asset that lived on that network went to crap, like overnight. It had nothing backing it whatsoever. And so as somebody who went through that and has, watched firsthand these things take place, I can see why this would have a lot of merit, and especially if, you're kind of merging the best of crypto with the best of TradFi, because it's not an either or scenario. It's kind of a meshing of the two. This makes a lot of sense to me. And I appreciate you breaking that down.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good example. So again, when you look at, like, even if you have a smart contract system that doesn't have flaws, and that's kind of like a unicorn mythical concept, right? Because all smart contracts have flaws, and they can run for years before someone finds it, but somebody finally finds it, and, again, you have interfaces in and out of those. And like with the Bybit hack, they actually hacked the entry point into it versus the control itself, right? So you just, whatever it is, there's just a lot of really smart, clever people spending their full time trying to figure out how to hack into these systems. And so the way that we're approaching it is similar to our fraud protections and our loss protections. We just put another barrier, another level of protection around it, right? And so if the North Koreans come in and they hack, the custody partners, that's managing the bailment process, if they hack the custody partners system, that's the kind of stuff that's covered, by insurance. And then you're also being, having these assets held by entities that don't, they have their own legal financial responsibilities in the law, within the regulatory environments that they live in. And, governments can come in and, put freezes on things, and it's a lot of stuff that the crypto space doesn't like. But again, when you're getting TradFi institutions, it's stuff that they're used to. But the flip side of that coin is, you also have the protections of the law as well, right? And so if you aren't doing anything illegal, and there's a legal process you have to go through and fight for your rights or whatever, we live under laws that generally are fair, and you can figure it out and solve your you can work through the legal system. And so, and in a lot of ways, you don't have to work through the legal system because you're within the legal system. And so these companies that are managing your assets, they won't allow assets to just be siphoned off. And, they have the insurance as well, right? For things that aren't government, kind of initiated. So it would be tougher. Like, we're setting things up in a way that, like the example you just gave, that wouldn't happen, right? You wouldn't have a situation with a custody partner that's running under a regulatory environment that has insurance. Like, almost by definition, like you can't get insurance if you're in a situation where things can be just kind of taken away on a whim, the way they were, you just described, right? So you're just placing your safety and security more within, the realm that we're all used to living in. Like, we aren't generally afraid of our bank account being drained the same way we're afraid of our crypto accounts being drained, right? That kind of thing. So it just puts a lot of the safety and security more in kind of the TradFi space, but it also kind of fundamentally makes it where the assets that you own, that are tied into this bailment process that I just explained, they're still, not your keys, not your crypto. And we have the theft protections and the private key loss protections in our system that makes that much more safer as well. So it's, to me, the best of both worlds. It's not your keys, not your crypto. You're really fully in control of your assets. You can put them in a status where they're protected and usable. One example is I had a fellow that was that told me a story that he was in. I might even been you. I'm trying to remember who told me the story, but they had an uncle that had a scammer steal money from their bank account, and they went to the bank and said, "Hey, a scammer got a hold of my uncle. He's elderly. They took advantage of him," right? And then the bank, were like, "Well, it's not my problem." Whereas with our system, you could put fraud protections in place. And an elderly uncle, you just have to discover it. But you can put, notifications and stuff where you will discover it. So you have to discover it within kind of the time frame you set up. But then you discover it and you say, "Oh, a scammer came in, took advantage of this elderly person," and even have more protection and more control than the TradFi system has. So again, I think you have the best of both worlds. You have direct control through your private keys with the backstop of theft protection and loss protection. But then you also have, in the case of underlying assets like Bitcoin, you have a bailment system that really protects you through any risk of bankruptcy and any risk of the custody partner. Again, it just kind of covers you along the whole spectrum of risks.
Well, at the risk of making this, a lot of risks here, at the risk of making this video go a little bit too long, I am curious, because I know, when people, deposit or withdraw onto an exchange, it's largely an automated process that happens through a hot wallet, which, side note, those are normally the ones that get hacked. But, with bailment partners, I'm assuming there has to be some sort of hot wallet type setup to ensure that depositing and withdrawing is automated within a, maybe a cap. Is that, am I thinking of this correctly?
Yeah. So if you want to put Bitcoin to trade and use on our platform, including like if you want to use for payments or whatever, right? You'll transfer your Bitcoin to an address that will then give you credit, and then the credit will give you our version of Bitcoin, so Devv Bitcoin. And so all of that is similar to, and on the interface, it might even just look like Bitcoin, right? But it's one-to-one back, so it is actually a wrapped token, but you can use it just like Bitcoin. And then if you want to get the Bitcoin back out, there's a reverse process where you can, send the Devv Bitcoin into the bailment process. It'll get burned, and then the Bitcoin will come back out. So in our case, again, you kind of eliminate risk from the user's point of view, because the bailment partners get a full copy of the blockchain. They can make sure that the transaction that they received the Bitcoin has actually been credited with Devv Bitcoin to the user's wallet, and so it's all immutable records that you can track and make sure everything goes and is handled properly.
Cool, man. This was a great episode. I'm glad that we had a chance to chat about this. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this up? We should probably announce when we're doing the live stream. Do you want to?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yep. So go ahead.
Our normal time that we release the roundups are noon Eastern on Wednesdays. And so at half hour earlier next Wednesday, which is going to be August the 13th. So it's going to be 3:30 p.m. UTC. It'll be 11:30 a.m. Eastern, which is 8:30 a.m. Pacific. I'm saying that correctly, man.
Yep.
Math is mathing. I'm going to be going live here with Tom. We're going to be answering your questions. Comments will be on, and it'll be the first time I think Tom and I have ever gone live on YouTube. So it should be a rip roaring good time. I have no doubt everybody will be there. So
yeah, it'll be great. And go to the DevvE main Telegram group, and you can see the form for asking questions. So if there's questions you want to have answered, submit them there, and then we'll just go crank through a bunch of them.
Bring them on in. Let's do it. All right, Tom, thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate you breaking that down for us. My name is Austin. I'll catch you guys on the next live stream. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Austin.